right, so welcome back to the podcast. Today I have Guy Dazin with me. He is an artist, writer, poet, educator, and also a podcast host as well. So, Guy, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jerry, for having me on your podcast. It is a pleasure.
A little bit about you, if you could share, like, what are you doing today and who are you today? Just kind of scanning LinkedIn. You went to university in Israel, and if I understand correctly, you live in Israel currently.
Yes, I do. I live in Israel. I studied at Bar Ilan University in the central of Israel. It's a very prestigious university, one of the major four universities in the country. I have an MA master's degree in English literature in conjunction with two-pronged course in art history and contemporary Jewry, which is contemporary Jewish history.
Okay. Um,
I also have two degrees, two teaching certificate instructing in the English professions and art history profession.
okay. And have you always lived in Israel, or have you lived in United States? You don't seem to have an accent. You have a pretty good English. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm self-taught. I'm an autodidact. I'm a self-learner. I'm a polyglot, so I pick up languages very fast. I know a bit of French, a bit of Italian, Romanian, and also English and Hebrew. My native language, my native tongue, is Hebrew. Of course, I'm from Israel. I was born and raised and still living in Israel, but I traveled a lot abroad, and I got, a lot of knowledge and got to practice my English with a lot of people, custodians and tourists and, you know, hoteliers and concierge from all parts of the globe. So I'm well traveled, well read. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of languages, I believe I saw an interview you did, and it sounded to me like it was in Japanese as well. Do you know Japanese too, or you kind of learned a little bit
I,
of it?
I learned a bit of Japanese, especially for that case, for that interview. And, I don't know how to converse, fluently in Japanese, not by any means, it's not even close. So I had a friend who was studying Eastern studies.
Hmm.
Um, so, a part of those types of studies, when you study the East, particularly, China, Korea, Japan, Taiwan, all those Eastern Asian countries. So I learned a bit from her, and she taught me a few words and how to ask questions. Yeah, so I have to admit I will concede that I do not know Japanese, because Japanese is completely opposite to English and Hebrew.
Hmm.
Because the subject and the object in English, the subject comes first and the object second. But in Japanese, it's reversed.
Hmm.
So if you would like to say in Japanese, I would like to go to France, for example, you would say, France, I want to go.
Hmm.
So it's reversed in Japanese. Very confusing.
It's like the Star Trek Yoda, right?
Yeah, something like that. But the dialect that he speaks is even more confusing, because he doubles the subject, at the beginning of the sentence and at the end,
Mm.
you know.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I meant Star Wars, not Star Trek. But
Yeah, me also, me. I'm Star Wars all the way, my force, may the force be with you. We should have done this podcast on May the 4th, but it doesn't
yeah,
matter. It's good that we're even speaking to each other.
yeah. Um, so you're currently you're teaching. Are you in a university or like where are you teaching?
Now, I'm teaching in multiple places, in multiple institutions. I teach at the University of Bar-Ilan in the preparatory school for English. People who want to be admitted and accepted into university, they
Hmm.
go through this process. They have to pick up the English language, they have to study and practice, and they have to be proficient enough to pass the bar, of entry. Then I'm also teaching at a community center, and I have an independent English course there. And I also um, volunteer sometimes to help, underprivileged um, students and people. And I also do private tutoring in English.
Hmm. Okay, that's really good. Um, so going back in time when you were like in middle school or high school, what were you like? Were you um, like what was your life like, and what was your personality like back then?
Well, that's a big and great question to ask, as an interlocutor to the invitee or the guest. Um, well, I was a kind of a solitary kid. I was a very deep thinker, even as a kid. I always thought about, the astronomy, and I thought about philosophy, and I pondered upon the big questions of the universe. Is there a creator to the world? Um, who created it? What is the purpose of creation? So I was a kind of solitary kid. I wasn't very sociable in school. I wasn't, a particularly strong student, um, and I couldn't pay attention in class for much long. I would put on my headphones, during class. And there was a period that, I completely shut off and I just put my headphones on and I would, you know, was completely outside of
Hmm.
what was going on in class, and I never kept up with the homework, the material, you know, the syllabus. I knew nothing about it. Um, I was always self-taught. It was very difficult to get my attention as a student to actually put in the effort and the hours of learning and studying. I couldn't do that. It had to come from myself, my
Hmm.
own initiative. It couldn't be forced from the outside. Um,
Why do you
so
think
I
that was?
always found, yeah,
Sorry.
sorry.
Why do you think you were that way? Like, what would you attribute kind of you being that way? Is it more personality? Is it more upbringing? Like, what do you think influenced you to be that way?
I think it's my personality. It's not so much my upbringing, because I had a very, high status, very intellectualized, very, quality kind of a upbringing, upper class, not upper class, middle upper class, white collar, both parents working, very hard, slaving away at their jobs. Um, so I almost never saw my parents at the same time in the house. They would work different hours, very arduous, long hours. at their jobs, and I had to fend for myself sometimes. I had
Mhm.
some babysitters and stuff like that when we could afford them, but for the most part, I was alone, and I had myself and my thoughts to actually, ruminate
Mhm.
um, over reality, over my own personal situation. And I would go on these long promenades to the woods, and I would, there was a vast open space, right outside our neighborhood, and there was a particular tree that I would sit under, and I would kind of meditate. I would
Mhm.
gaze up at the stars, and I would kind of let the stream of consciousness kind of flow freely, without, thinking about anything else, just pondering about the nature, you know, of the world, and, purpose and all that good stuff. And yeah, I kind of gained a lot of wisdom through this process of self, meditating, self thinking, critically
Mhm.
and rationally about myself and the nature of the universe and the purpose of humanity as a whole. So I got a very different perspective,
And
than the other, my peers.
and just I have a follow-up question on this, but just before that, are you an only child or did you have siblings?
Yes, yes. I'm an only child.
Okay.
Yes. That's
And
a good
then
guess. Yeah.
and then when you were it was saying kind of meditating under the tree, how old were you and for what period of time did you do that?
Mm. I think about a year I did that. Um, After that, I would go back and visit that tree, a
Hmm.
kind of a nostalgia,
Yeah.
to ruminate and reminisce about my times there under the tree.
Were
And
were you like in high school at that time or what kind of age
no,
range?
no, I was quite young, perhaps 10,
Hmm.
11, thereabouts in the ballpark of 10 or 11. So yeah.
Hmm. And you mentioned kind of like that it was like a profound experience. Do you feel that the information you're getting, is it more from like outside source or is it more coming from within you? Like what's
Mm,
um, kind of like your answers to the questions, to the big questions, like why are we here on Earth and things like that? Like where do you
mhm.
get those answers from? Is it like coming from the environment, other people outside, or is it coming from the inside?
You have so many great questions. I just want to stop and tell you that this small caveat. You have so many great questions. Okay,
Thank you.
another great question. The source of that kind of knowledge, it was emanating, I think, it was a kind of a mix of a projecting my own self, onto the physical world, and sort of receiving or some resonance or reverberation from the universe back into me that I absorb, and that kind of seed grew and flourished into some type of idea. And
Mhm.
every time there was a new kind of revelation. Okay, so this time around, I understand that there is something larger than this universe, the Earth, Um, Next time around, I will come to the conclusion that maybe we are not alone in the universe. I'm not saying that I believe in, extraterrestrials or aliens or anything like that. I'm just saying that as a kid, you have to wonder, and ruminate on these questions because they are very valuable, I think, to the human spirit and the human soul. It nourishes it nourishes us in a way that I think nothing else can satiate our pursuit of knowledge, of curiosity, and nothing can quite, fill that hole, that gap, the chasm in the human spirit that is also always longing to be filled.
Hmm. And and so back when you were still young, did you grow up in like a religious type of family or environment, or was it more secular? Like, what was the upbringing like in that term, in those terms?
No, my upbringing was quite secular. Um, there wasn't a lot of religion involved, not in a kind of, formal, strict, orthodox sense. It
Hmm.
wasn't like that. It was just plain old, secular um, upbringing, education. Nothing too fancy or too rave about. It wasn't, it wasn't a sob story or it wasn't a kind of religious frenzy. No, it was a very secular environment. Um, I was a kind of a minority because a lot of the people who live, the populace or the demographic, the how do you call it? The demograph? No, no, no. Uh, No, I forgot it. Dem,
Like the
let's
more
let's
popular.
just say the demographical kind of map
Hmm.
or the populace. They were composed of mainly Russian immigrants, from
Okay.
the Soviet Union, the ex-Soviet Union, USSR. And yeah, so I was a kind of a minority. So most people in that neighborhood were very secular.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, in Russia, uh, you could not study the Talmud or the Bible. Hebrew studies were prohibited, you know, absolutely. So you could not, absorb any type of religion or Zionist kind of ideal. It was all, about the communist
Yeah.
dream of the proletariat, taking over the upper echelons or the ruling class, dethroning them, and imposing a new utopia, you know, uh, onto the world
Yeah. So
under a red banner. Yeah.
yeah. So are your parents or relatives kind of from Russia?
No, that's why I said that I am the minority,
Okay.
But they're not from Russia, but my grandparents, they
Hmm.
are from the USSR. They are from Bulgaria.
Okay.
So there's that. So my two grandfathers, each of them, it's funny, each of them fought uh, in the Second World War. One fought for the Red Army,
Hmm.
for the communists, and the other one fought um, for the American and British
Hmm.
armies. So it was funny, They never met, my grandparents. One of them died, and the other, I think maybe they met one time, or something like that, but not more. So I'm guessing that kind of meeting would not be a very pleasant one, you know?
Yeah, during the war, definitely. Yeah, I'm just curious about that. I'm originally from Ukraine, so you mentioned there has been a lot of immigration from former USSR to Israel. I remember when my family left Ukraine, we came to US, but we had to go um, through Europe. Basically, we would go to
You
Italy, like
came
Austria, Italy.
after the fall of the Soviet Union.
It was just before that in 1989. So 91
Hmm.
it fell apart, but in 89 we moved out.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I remember at that time, um, there was the only way to leave former USSR was to go to Israel. So everybody had like tickets or whatever you want to call it, as though they're traveling out to Israel. But then as soon as we
Mm,
crossed the border, then we went to
yeah,
US. So it was kind
yeah,
of interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
And I'm sure a lot of these immigrants chose to stay or to make their Israel their new home,
Yeah, and some
perhaps.
people definitely like when we stayed in Austria, there were a lot of Jewish people staying there too. It was kind of like the similar path, but then from Austria, I think they went to Israel, and then we went to Italy, and then from Italy up to U.S.
Mm,
Kind of a
yeah.
thing. Yeah, so that's definitely interesting there. Um, so kind of going back to your life in high school, did you play any sports? Did you like what was your kind of day-to-day activities like?
Yeah, I'm quite overweight now, but when I was a kid, I was very athletic, very limber, very agile, very fast. I was very athletic also. So there was a time where I took a few kind of recreational sports.
Hmm.
It wasn't a competitive kind of level of sports, but I took karate and judo. I also took basketball and tennis. So
Hmm.
I had a lot of things going on. Although now in retrospect, I'd wished that I took on like something like chess maybe because
Hmm.
my love of chess kind of grew more and more, and there's a lot of great chess players from the USSR, you know. So Karpov and Kasparov, and I
Yeah.
love, even Mikhail Tal. So all those great champions, I love the game
Hmm.
of chess. I also love badminton. So I wished I had gone into, badminton and chess or tennis, uh, but it kind of fell through, and I sort of got, overweight. There's a point in your adolescence when you just, start swelling up, and you
Hmm.
stop being so athletic and flexible and agile and fast and quick. So I'm still fast and quick, and I have a great hand-eye coordination, but now it's very reduced. Now I have to get into shape, to start picking up the routine and exercise and fitness and all that stuff. So it will take a couple of years before, I'm back in full shape, full force.
Yeah. But when you were in high school and then going on to college, um, what was your thought process at that point? Like, did you want to go to college? Did you want to just get a job? Did you want to go into military? Actually, in Israel, you're required to go into the IDF, right? So, um,
Exactly.
so did you go into IDF first? Is that was that kind of the,
Yes.
the track? What was that
Yes, I
experience
did.
like?
Sorry?
What was that
The
experience like?
experience. Yeah. So I had a sort of, because I was a very solitary child, not very sociable, um, not very adaptable to uh, larger groups of people. There are a lot of, kind of binding exercises, to sort of bind a group of people together. So there are a lot of practices and drills and a lot of physicality, in boot camp, for example. So I had quite lengthy kind of a boot camp as opposed to other people because I was a semi-combatant. I wasn't a full-fledged combatant, thrown into the battlefield, but I
Mm-hmm.
was a semi-combatant. I carried a personal firearm for the entirety of my service. Um, I had a lot of, kind of adjustment problems in the boot camp, and I sort of got into some fights with the other cadets at the boot camp. Well, not all of them, but some of them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I had some adjustment issues, but I overcame them, slowly but surely. I got into the routine. You have to be a fully fledged soldier inside of the camp. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you have to make your bed. You wake up. You go to sleep. Well into the night. The middle of the night, and you wake up quite early. 5 a.m., 4 a.m. Crazy hours like that. They are called the witching hours. Perhaps we'll get, into esotericism and all that good stuff later on, and I'll talk about what the witching hours,
Mm-hmm.
represent and symbolize. But, okay, moving on. So in boot camp, you had to be it was even very competitive, with the other cadets. If you carry one jerry can, I need to carry, three jerry can. I can, kind of, there's a fireman carry, so I can, you can take, the, how do you call it, in the ambulance, you have, yeah, the girder.
Okay.
You have the girder, yeah,
Yeah.
that you carry. And so people oftentimes would faint, you know, during the training because of the uh, because of the scorching heat from the
Mm-hmm.
sun, of course, and the extreme temperatures. Because I went, into the south, so the south is um, very hot. And the climate is dry. It is a desert. The south is completely, it's a completely a desert wasteland. Um, there's no kind of greenery or, you know, no forest, no bodies of water, nothing like that.
Mm-hmm.
So you're in the heat most of the day. The sun goes down only at night. Um, so it was very intensive. 4 months. Um, you have your first kind of a fitness and bonding experience with your unit, but it's just a pretend unit because you will be shipped off to
Mm-hmm.
your real unit after the boot camp is done. But my boot camp wasn't done. I also have a training and apprenticeship because I had a profession. I had a specific profession that I can't talk about because it's classified.
Mm.
So, but I carried a firearm. I transported some materials that I can't divulge what they are. But I was conscripted into the Air Force, and
Okay.
I was very proud of that because there's a lot of prestige that comes with that. The great history and heritage of the Israeli Air Force. It's a great kind of a force and unit of the IDF. So I was very proud of that, and in my informal kind of training and apprenticeship, I had to study a lot, of technical kind of terms, jargon. I had to uh, kind of, be proficient in a lot of different technical and logistical problems.
Mm.
And we would go through, we would get different exams and different tests. It was like a classroom, and you had to learn and pass the exams and the tests. And of course, you had to keep the etiquette and the kind of formalness of a soldier, a fully fledged soldier.
Mm.
Your uniform had to be clean, had to be pressed. Um, you had, to tie your shoelaces. You had to tuck in your shirt. And you had to, adjust your unit's cap. The unit cap. And yeah, so I was very proud of that. Yeah.
Were you a pilot in the Air Force at all, or no?
No, I was not.
Okay.
As I told you before, I cannot
Yeah.
divulge my exact profession
Yeah, that's
inside
fine.
the IDF because it is classified.
Yeah. And like so you in school you mentioned you had a hard time kind of learning. How did you overcome that in the IDF when you had to sit in the classroom environment and learn kind of in that traditional style?
Yeah, I had to kind of switch my perception of what authority figures actually wanted of me,
Hmm.
because I had a lot of different biases building up from past experiences that kind of held me back from letting other people teach me, because I was so accustomed to teach myself and to learn for myself and to explore and discover. So these kind of authority problems, or accepting um, others' kind of authority and teachings, that was a kind of a slow process. It took me a while,
Hmm.
to actually um, get over or overcome my inner ego. Freud said there are three types of subconscious. You know, there's the id, which is one of the lower kind of base um, desires that a human, the human consciousness, uh, encompasses. There's the ego and there's the super ego. So you had, to adapt yourself to constantly, have that super ego, you know, on all of the time. You couldn't, debase yourself and
Hmm.
actually let your your baser kind of desires and instinct, take over you. You had to remain in complete and utter control, 24 hours, because any slip up, any mistake would cost, you could be, reprimanded, you could be punished, you could be thrown in jail, you could be, subject to um, monetary punishments. You had to pay some sort of amount of tax, or get some report. So you wouldn't have to pay that out of your own pocket. You would take a kind of salary cut. That's what they would do. You would take a salary cut. And for a soldier, a salary cut is very, it hits very close to home, because the salary is so, uh, is so low, in the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
So um, as your proficiency goes up, as you go up in ranks, inside the unit, inside the hierarchy or the command ladder in the army, of course the salaries go up and up. But as a grunt is a base level soldier. There's a cadet, boot camp and training and apprenticeship, and then there's a grunt. A grunt is is a semi-combatant or combatant,
Mm-hmm.
essentially a private, and then you have, of course, a corporal, and then it goes on and on.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't want to mess around, with the code of law, ethics, etiquette, itinerary, schedule, all that good stuff. You also had different chores. So there were chores that were mandatory. And when you were a junior cadet or private, you would get more and more chores, stacked up, because everybody throws that kind of menial labor and hard labor. They throw it on, on the younglings,
Yeah.
the juniors, and I did that, when I went up the ranks, I threw, because you are an essential asset, someone who is a junior or a private is not as essential, to the operation as, the senior officers or cadets, yeah, and the privates, corporals, sergeants, so all that stuff.
Okay. So you
So
spent
yeah,
did you spend like 2 years?
I
How many years?
adapted. I adapted, to authority, and I accepted the authority of people who I respected.
Mm-hmm.
Because even though there's a hierarchy in the army, there's still, the rules apply to everybody. The rules apply, of course, differently. If you're, of course, if you're a unit commander, there are rules that can be altered or changed in times of emergency. So, of course, it changes, but
Mm-hmm.
the rules apply to almost uh, all of the rungs in the ladder of the hierarchy of command.
Mm-hmm. So did you how long did you spend in the IDF? How many years were you in there?
So I did, the basic mandatory 3 year service.
Mm-hmm.
It's a full 3 years. um, your salary um, is, very, very low. Um, so there were people who were granted special permission to get some sort of a pay job, a day job,
Mhm.
or a kind of a kind of a side job. So if you had a free weekend, so you would get some kind of an odd job,
Mhm.
deliveries or washing dishes or something along those lines. But you didn't have any kind of opportunity to apply for a job with a career, a pension plan, dental, 401k, all that good stuff. No, you couldn't do something like that. It's simply impossible.
Mhm. But so after the your IDF service, you decided to go into the university. What was your decision process like at that time? Again, like earlier in high school, middle school, you were not. It seems like you didn't like the structured education, but then you did go on to the university where there is.
Hmm.
I mean, maybe there's a combination of structured, non-structured, but a lot of it is structured.
Yes, so even though I had a lot of problems learning, adjusting to everyday ordinary school life, the curriculum, um, it seems very arbitrary to me, very limiting,
Hmm.
because my wealth of knowledge and the kind of a trove of knowledge that I accrued throughout the years. So that kind of a mainstream, rigid, indoctrinated, the methods and philosophies of different teachers were set in stone, and you could not deviate even for an inch from, from the prescribed, lesson plan or material or curriculum. The syllabus um, was always the same, and the problem is that the recidivism. A lot of teachers who just drop out, from the teaching system for various reasons, a plethora of different reasons. But whenever some, if a teacher, got pregnant and was on labor leave, you know, um, so there was a substitute teacher, and now all of a sudden you have to learn, new material from different textbooks.
Hmm.
And the way the methods of learning are changing, when that teacher steps into the classroom, and you have to adjust yourself and adapt, to the new standards that that teacher sets. Um, so that was part of the problem. That, of course, um, it's not consistent. When you go, when I was in kindergarten, I I was in a different city, and we moved to this neighborhood in a different city, and I went to elementary school. So elementary school, they have the elementary school teachers, and then you go into middle school, and then they have different teachers there. So I could never quite, adjust myself to that kind of a shifting, the authority shifting from different individuals, people you formed some sort of relationship with. Um, but I now, looking back in a retrospective, I know exactly, you know, all the all the inner mechanics that go into it. Some of the teachers uh, I had in middle school and high school, they were the same
Hmm.
essentially because it was an integrative school. It had an integration with middle school and high school. It wasn't an independent middle school and an independent high school.
Hmm.
Um, so I would always, gravitate to the teachers. I like the teachers that have, a kind of an open mind. Um, they are not rigid in their kind of in their philosophy and pedagogical methods. Um, they give each student, their time. The time is allocated fairly throughout the class, and no one feels as if though they are being left out. Um, so, um, so the shift happened very radically, you know, because university, um, it's not obligatory, it's not mandatory, to attend class.
Hmm.
Nobody cares. Um, most of the professors and instructors I had in university did not enforce, a mandatory attending, you know. Um, so so I liked that a lot, I liked I liked it a lot that you were not, forced, you were not a captive audience. Um, so that aspect, I liked, and that's what kind of made me into a better listener
Hmm.
because I have a lot of weird afflictions or abilities, so I can write, without looking, at the paper, without looking down.
Hmm.
So a lot of people are it looks like magic to a lot of people that I write, and I look, directly at them, So when I write, they think I'm writing gibberish or something like that, but no, I'm writing coherently,
Hmm.
the words. So it seems like black magic or or witchcraft to some people, but I developed that, ability or skill through playing basketball, through playing tennis. You can't look at the basketball all of the time. You can't look at the tennis ball all of the time. You have to look where you're going, to hit the strike, Um, so you have to do both of these things all of the time. Also
Hmm.
in karate and judo, you can't look, every time you try you have to look at the direction. You can't look, you know, uh, you can't watch, your hand going from here to here. You have to look at the direction. So that's how I developed that hand to eye coordination through all those practices and athletic fields. Um, so I like studying in university. I loved it, I relished every minute of it because everything was new.
Hmm.
Because I never studied, through the main channels, the textbooks. Um, no, almost never. It was always, through art, music, books, natural history, museums, all that good stuff. I never really learned anything from textbooks.
Mm,
Um, and the only professions that I excelled at were the humanist professions.
humanitarian.
Um,
Or,
Humanitarian, yeah,
so
the humanitarian.
would you say that um, because in the university you had the freedom, like you chose voluntarily to go into the university, so because of that freedom, you were actually able to study and learn more rather than in like middle school, high school, where you had to go kind of almost like by force type of a thing. Was that like a subconscious thing that helped you change basically from like wanting to be there versus not wanting to be in high school earlier?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. You have to build some sort of a rapport with your teacher, your mentor, your instructor, your professor, your guider, whatever that may be. Um, you have to build some sort of rapport, some sort of relationship. It can't be, a cold, calculated. You know, I just want to uh, to get out something, from you, and I don't want to give back anything. I don't want to know anything about you. No, it's not like that. Um, when you are a kind of a stoic, I know this from a perspective of a teacher. When you're a stoic and you can answer all of the questions, calmly, rationally, using your natural faculties. Um, that kind of stoic, moralistic antics and etiquette, it won't get you far,
Mhm.
in the discipline and the field of education and pedagogy. Um, you have to learn to balance, those two factions. We have two factions in our brains that are competing or vying, for dominance. We have the artifice, the artsy kind of imaginative, creative side of the brain, and we have the analytical, methodological, um, very stoical, very um, rational part of the brain, and we need to find a good balance between the two halves of the brain. So you have to have that complete experience in order to be a good instructor and instructor and to pass on the knowledge. You have to gain the respect of your audience. There are people who take the route, of rationality and stoicism, get the information out, precisely in a very convincing kind of a way. And there are the creative, imaginative people on the other side of the spectrum, which are no worse, than the kind of art, than the kind of analytical side. The people or the instructors or the persons who just wing it. They come to class, they are 15 minutes late. They're having a cup of coffee. They haven't prepared, some. PowerPoint presentation. They haven't prepared any material for the course, for the lesson, and they just wing it. They rely on the kind of rapport and relationship that they have with the students in the room, and they try to teach through allegory, through allegory, through metaphor, through storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
So these, you know, being strictly a cold-hearted, analytical, technocrat is not a good thing. And on the other hand, to be a storyteller is not to be a teacher.
Mm.
If you want to be a storyteller, if you want to be an entertainer, you can go to the stage or you can write a book, for example. You can't, you can't be, you can't completely, you know, relinquish this kind of rapport that you have with the student. There is a certain type, the status of the relationship between you and the student is very different to the people you meet outside your circle of friends, your relatives, um, different coworkers. You can't have the same relationship with these people as your students. You have to have some degree or measure of respect, that builds, or some kind of intellectual distance between you and your students. And then you can start being, creative and imaginative in your teaching process.
Mm-hmm. So going to a little bit different direction. When it comes to one's calling or purpose, how do you feel, or what is your experience with figuring out what your purpose in life is, or what your calling is, or there's all kinds of terms, your passion that people put on. Like what would you say, like somebody who's just getting out of high school, how would you advise them to find their path in life, their passion, their purpose, their calling in life?
Mm-hmm. Another great question. You're just killing it today. Banger after banger after banger of a question. No stopping. It's like a queen. No stopping me. Don't stop me. Yeah, you can't be stopped. You know. Um, Another great question. They say that people who know, people um, who um, who kind of they they decipher or they can explain, if they can explain a term, um, or some kind of a phenomena, a natural phenomena. For example, if you say that a thunderstorm occurs because the difference in temperatures, you know that is a very simple explanation. There are heat waves that go up and they mingle with the cold atmosphere and air, and that causes precipitation, rain falling down. Sorry. That's a good explanation. And people like that kind of, simple explanation. If they wanted to get a very deep inside analysis of meteorology, they would pick up a book. They wouldn't, listen to another person talking,
Mm-hmm.
because we are accustomed, to very fast, very condensed kind of speech, um, that has different intervals. You can't, speak, a blind filibuster. You have to make it an incremental kind of kind of step. Um, so gradually, incrementally, um, talking more and more and more, because because instinctually, when you approach a person or you talk with a person that you've never met before, you're instantly suspicious. You have your guards up. You don't know what that person wants or needs from you, and you want to have that certainty of what that person actually needs from you. So if you don't know what is the intent, what is the purpose of that person speaking to you, you are instantly very suspicious of that other kind of stranger that walks up to you. So that same concept stays the same. So um, regarding your purpose in life, I know for a fact that I haven't achieved my or found out my purpose in life. And I believe that no person can achieve or know their exact purpose in one lifetime. That will never happen. It doesn't mean that I believe in, the afterlife, or I believe in reincarnation. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying simply that I do not believe that a person can truly know what their purpose in life is, because I believe in the alternative kind of thought or perspective that humans make, for the most part, humans make their own purpose in life. And whatever they build, whatever aim or goal they strive for, that will be their purpose. And that purpose shifts and changes, throughout your life. And it doesn't change, only in kind of cycles or periods or different epochs of your life. It changes also in an everyday kind of routine, quotidian, boring sense. It always changes. If it doesn't change completely, it tweaks, you tweak something. You learned something that made you change your perspective. When your perspective changes, you gradually start changing. You take on different practices and routines that you wouldn't regularly do previous to you discovering that knowledge. So now, having all that accrued knowledge, you start to shift and change, and your inner workings, your intrinsic instincts start to shift and change. And then your daily practices start to shift and change. And then your purpose starts to shift and change and alter into a different kind of iteration of that purpose. It doesn't mean that that purpose, the original kind of purpose, goes away or dissipates completely. It means that you have redefined your purpose. And that's what I believe. I hope it's a simple enough explanation.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Along those lines, I wonder, like for me, and I hear this from other people. Wonder for you as well. Do you feel like you're here on this earth to do something great?
Hmm. Great questions. I can't stop saying great questions, great questions. You are the ultimate. I bet you were a great student, like a straight A student. I can feel it.
I
Yes,
used to
you
be.
were. Yes, you were. I know. Uh, your questions are just impeccable, immaculate, beneficent. I don't have any, words in the vocabulary. There are no words in the vocabulary to describe your question. Amazing. So, again, what's the question?
So like, do you have a sense of like that you were put here on Earth to do something great?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So, a lot of people throughout history try to define that term. They call it predestination. They call it destiny. They call it serendipity. They call it luck. Uh, they call it a purpose. They call it an essence. There are so many great terms and sorry, words for you know. Um, so let's take for example the religious perspective. Okay, I'm not saying that I side with either the atheists or the theists or the believers. Um, let's take, for example, religion. Religion prescribes or um, proposes, postulates that the world was built for some sort of purpose. Um, the Old Testament tells us that the world was created for man to be fruitful and multiply. And that is mostly what Judaism and Christianity kind of believe and preaches. Um, the essential tenets, the 10 commandments, um, only 7 of the 10 commandments, they are called the Noahide laws, apply to the Goyim. And the Goyim are the non-Jews. So the non-Jews can be Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, Baha'i, Druze, whatever kind of denomination or religious belief system you would like to choose. The Goyim are the kind of other, So that kind of a tribalistic, um, primitive, I would say, mindset dictated a lot of the philosophical kind of movements and ideas, and the philosophical scholars were all bent on trying to prove that the world has some sort of purpose. Firstly, that it has a maker. So the kind of monotheistic supreme God, ruler of the universe, Jesus is called, the Rex Mundi, the king of the world. And the world is not just confined to those terms. It means, the universe. That great, majestic portrait that Leonardo da Vinci painted of depicting the Christ, then a great painting that was sold for over $500 million in a public auction, which is emphatically, insane. Um, you know, those kinds of depictions and religious um, religious beliefs and credos that dictate the lives of the humans for thousands of years. Um, those types of ideas start to fade, ever since the scientific revolution in the 16th and 17th century. Afterwards, of course, in the Industrial Revolution, we had, of course, the uh, the Revolution of 1789 in France, and that revolutionary movement changed the entire world. History completely changed. Let's just take, for example, um, Napoleon Bonaparte was the first emancipator of Jews in the ghettos in Europe, because the Nazis did not invent the ghettos. Jews were living in ghettos for thousands of years in the continent of Europe. They lived in the Pale of Settlements, for example, in Russia and Ukraine. They lived in the ghettos in Florence and Venice and in Italy. Throughout, they were conversos in 1492. All of the Jews were forced to convert to Christianity in Spain and Portugal after the royal marriage of the uh, the the heir of Spain, Ferdinand, and the queen, the princess at that time, the princess of Portugal. She became the queen, called Isabella. So in 1492 and in 1495, all the Jews were either expelled from Spain or Portugal, or they would forcibly convert into Christianity, and specifically Catholic Christianity. The Reformation did not reach, Spain and Portugal. King Henry VIII chose to change his kind of belief, denomination from Catholicism to Reformation after the Reformation Revolution, headed by Martin Luther, the great preacher and philosopher and anti-Semite. Um, but a lot of religion, you know, tries to dictate um, and monitor human behavior, human practices, human beliefs, even human relationships and thoughts, even your type of wrong think. There's a wrong think. It comes from the book by George Orwell, 1984, that Big Brother, if you are accused and indicted for the crimes of wrong think, you were to be kind of deleted. It's a kind of editorial journalistic term, to scrap or censor some information, so you were kind of deleted from the narrative. You are not a part of the beehive. You're a rogue kind of a force inside of the utopian society. You shake that foundation, and you should be, ridden. You should be rid. They should rid themselves of you as a pestilence. So the church has done a lot of bad things, during the Crusades. They slaughtered, thousands of Jews, particularly in Germany and France, on their way to fight a holy war in Jerusalem. Um, the Pope promised to pardon every unchristian sin, because sins back in those days, there were 7 of them, and they were a mortal sin. A mortal sin means that the capital punishment applies.
Mm.
It's not flagellation, it's not, cutting your hand, in Europe, religion is so messed up back in the medieval days that in Europe, almost every town in the town square had a tree where they would hang, the severed hands of thieves,
Wow.
thieves and infidels, infidelity or unfaithfulness, like in the Scarlet Letter, for example, another great book worth reading that talks about adultery. So, um, in the modern world, petty theft is not penalized. You do not get punished for petty theft. Adultery, nobody gets punished, for adultery. Um, sacrilege, you know, defacing or um, uh, iconoclast. Iconoclast means the defacing or destruction of a religious site
Mm.
or a religious icon or whatever. It's called iconoclasm, and in the modern sense, it refers to the old doctrines and philosophies. Um, Iconoclasm also takes the form of the English Reformation in the second part of the 17th century in Britain. In Britain, there was a civil war. Uh, that was the first revolutionary war where the government, you know, uh, they are called, um, how do you call them? Um, Not the federal, um,
Like state or
no, the
okay.
parliamentary government um, voted on regicide. Regicide means the execution of a king, a ruling king, and in his tenure, uh, no less. So that was a precedent, that almost never occurred in history. A formal institution of the government is stronger than the church, because
Mhm.
remember, a king was he was chosen by God to rule as a monarch. So it was the first time in history that the secular parliamentary body, government, or institution um, had the power to execute a king. So why am I talking about all that kind of a religious history? Because it speaks to the fact that I don't know. That's the shorthand answer. I don't know if there is, if there even is a purpose to humanity. Um, that's why I chose all those religious examples. Um, Religion says all those things, that we need. If you're Jewish, you need to keep the Shabbos, Saturday. Um, you need to, keep your hands to yourself and on your wife and and not a strange woman. You can't covet your neighbor's, fortune or goods. Um, so I don't know if that's a purpose of humanity on Earth. There are people today, the modern kind of a priesthood class. That's a kind of a metaphorical term for them. They are called the hierophants. Hierophants is the Greek word for a priest. So the new priests are the technocrats. And
Mhm.
the technocrats, of course, the elite monopolies that actually, they are the real movers and shakers in the worlds of finance, politics, um, military, um, industry, all those different fields and disciplines. They believe that we need to abandon this earth after we abused the natural resources of earth after so many millennia of conflicts between humans, never ceasing. Every time there's a new reason, a new argument, a new conflict that emerges over territory, over material, over natural resources, um, over, philosophy, ideology, all that stuff, economic, even there are even conflicts that erupt after sport
Mhm.
events. So there are sport events in the Olympic international level that are so divisive that they sometimes they are a cause of conflicts and violence even. Um,
Yeah. So,
so yeah, they say we should abandon this earth. We abuse the natural resources of Earth. Humanity doesn't have any kind of common factor. It doesn't have any common purpose to cling on. It doesn't have, a dominant, unified ideology, philosophy, language, religion. You know, it doesn't have any of that. It doesn't have a unified, cohesive, sanctified even culture or a mythos. Humanity doesn't have, a unified, codified mythos of creation. Everyone assumes that are the they are the seeds. Uh, they are the progenies of great individuals, great peoples. You know, but they don't come from the same kind of the same culture, the same religion, the same language. So they say we should explore, the stars. We should invest more in interstellar travel. if it is made, possible due to the constraints of technological advances, lack of funding, lack of, public interest. So they wouldn't do that. That's why it's left to private, um, technocrats and billionaires, industry moguls like Elon Musk, to take up the mantle and actually try and create, some sort of vessel that can explore and travel through space, thousands and even tens of thousands of light years, to the neighboring uh, planets. The solar system, and a different solar system is a very distant, kind of dream. But the neighboring inhabitable, okay, if there is a habitable planet that is quite close to, Earth's orbit, and is not a very far-fetched kind of distant rock on the other side of the universe, then perhaps that kind of vision can be fulfilled in reality in the next, I don't know, perhaps by the end of this century. So there are those two extremes, religious fundamentalism, and you know, uh, there's the providence. Providence is the eye of God that is always watching, keeping watch on your moral behaviors and profile, even on your social and your personal development, your personal uh, perspective. And there's the other kind of, technocratic, monochromatic sort of elite priesthood, the hierophants that try to get us out off this planet, to go to some type of exo planet, to leave the atmosphere of Earth and to go and found some type of alternative society and culture, civilization on a habitable, you know, neighboring planet.
um, so you mentioned a couple things about like the Old Testament. I was wondering about this thought related to at least the biblical account, the Genesis account of creation. So when God created the heavens and
Mm-hmm.
the earth, everything was good. God created humans, everything was good. But when uh, when Eve sinned by eating the fruit that wasn't supposed to be eaten,
Mm-hmm.
at that point, the serpent was already either cast down or had access to this earth. Uh, and because he's deceiving her or he's trying to make her sin, in my assumption, he has already sinned or he's been kind of rejected by God. So the original
Mm-hmm.
sin didn't necessarily start with Eve and humans, right? It started with kind of the angelic realm. What in your research or in your historical kind of whatever you looked up or know or whatever, like what are your thoughts on that?
Well, original sin doesn't exist in Judaism. It appears in the Bible. Um, but the Bible doesn't go that far. The Old Testament, at least the story of Genesis, philosophically, it's quite, ambivalent to that concept. Um, later kind of interpretations, of course, took it very far, to mean that man is an original kind of a sinner. It is infused into the bone of humans, m- unmoral kind of a behavior, um, and the desire to sin, uh, and that kind of natural attraction to the forbidden fruit. That is a later
Mhm.
interpretation. Um, what you're talking about, the snake kind of being the first sinner and not as opposed to Eve, um, that's a very good distinction there, because medieval, um, you know, theologians throughout the Dark Ages postulate that original sin started with Eve, you know, falling into temptation and tasting of the fruit, the forbidden fruit of knowledge. Uh, Genesis, that story in the Garden of Eve, um, ends with God expelling um, Adam and Eve from by force. Yeah, they are being evacuated by force from the Garden of Eden, and the reason that God gives for that expulsion is because He didn't want Adam and Eve to discover the tree
Mhm.
of life. And that is a very interesting concept, because if they were to eat of the fruit of the tree of life, they will achieve immortality. And immortality is something that is very opposing the authority and power of God. Now, in the Bible, in Genesis, there are a lot of individuals that live for hundreds of years. Um, but it's very strange, because as the text and story goes on, you see that the length of time of the life shortens and shortens with each individual. So, for example, let's take for example Noah. Noah lived to 900 years or so. But when you look at Abraham, he lived only to be 140 or something like that. So gradually, um, man's natural average kind of living, and life gets cut more and more until it reaches the ripe old age, which is considered the perfect age, the age of complete enlightenment and wisdom, 120. Um, so, personally, what I think about the concept of original sin, I think religiously, um, for myself, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Um, if God half made us, yeah, I went biblical there. I went Shakespearean biblical. um, if he had made us in His image, so God uh, is not. Firstly, if He made us in His image, God is not all seeing, because man cannot, you know, supervise or observe the entire panorama. He can only observe about 170, degrees to any direction in that spectrum. So people are not, humans are not all seeing. Okay. Secondly, humans die. They so they are not immortal. They are not immune or impenetrable or invincible. Um, Thirdly, humans. So God is not omnipotent. He cannot do everything. Um,
But
I'm just, talking about, the dry kind of logic. I'm not talking about any any logical loopholes, that religious people might throw at you, kind of a monkey wrench. So God is not omnipotent, cannot do everything. Thirdly, um, God uh, God is not all good because man is able to sin. He was endowed with that trait, that skill, if we can call it that, with that ability to sin and to perform bad, bad and evil actions. Um, so God is not all good. Um, so the concept of original sin is a very childish, very primitive, unsophisticated, unintellectual type of thinking. But on the other hand, when you gradually um, start to um, build upon that knowledge, that initial kind of belief, um, you start to understand that there is something to it. You know, um, I'm not talking about the original sin itself, the story. The story itself. It's arbitrary, uh, but I'm talking about the consequences. Of that story. There are people who have alternative kind of theories when it comes to history, and they all stem from that kind of original sin. When man sinned, so some natural disasters and phenomena occurred in its wake. So the original sin was a kind of uh, it was um, uh, it was a catalyst. I'm sorry, it was a catalyst for different kind of natural disasters to occur.
mhm.
So a lot of people with alternative historical philosophies and narratives sort of cling to that because um, there are a lot of stories from the Greeks, I'm talking about, ancient Greeks, of course, the philosophers, Aristotle, Plato, and of course, the playwrights like Euripides and tragedians and epic poems. and poets like Homer, they are talking about a lot of natural disasters that occurred, you know, as a result of the wrath of the gods. So that's the kind of Greek version of original sin, because man was sinful and was expelled from heaven. That's the reason um, that the flood occurred, in the first place, because Cain, murdered his brother Abel. He was cursed for eternity, and he was the kind of curse that humanity had to bear for the rest of its
Mm-hmm.
existence. Um, so he symbolically carries that curse by a specific identifying mark on his forehead that every man or person who encounters him will know, distinguish that he is, in fact, Cain, the suffering of humanity embodied, in person, embodied. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Original sin, when it comes to the modern world, I can understand some of the, I can understand, some of the merit that believing in original sin, gives to a person. It gives to a person a lot of comfort, a lot of solace. A person can lean, on that kind of idea of
Do you
original
mean it
sin.
as an excuse?
He exactly, yeah, as an excuse, um, because the moralistic kind of spectrum has shifted. Um, this paradigm of morality has shifted from earlier times, and we are at an epoch or period where sin is just, a common daily occurrence. Back then, sinning uh, was was perceived to be, a mortal sin. A mortal sin was, it required, uh, a capital punishment. It required some, physical penalization. Um, so, of course, there were people who managed to exempt themselves from ever being punished by different means. Of course, there were people in key positions who abused their power to gain, for their own favor. Um, so original sin is a very deep kind of a notion, but in the base of the story, the origination of that concept is a bit childish, dichotomous. It's not complex. It's not layered. Um, it's not. It's not very. It's not very articulate. It's not very eloquent. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so it there's a big a kind of chasm of interpretation. It is open to a lot of different methods of interpretation, of
Yeah.
course.
Just wanted to kind of maybe explore a little bit more. When you mentioned that when God created man in his image, and then you mentioned that because we are fallible or sinful, therefore God is not good or God is not all seeing and so on. But isn't it more, he didn't create another God, he just created humans, which are lesser than God, and like we don't have all the
Mhm.
capacity of what God would have, right? Um, just a thought there.
Yeah, no, no, you're absolutely right to question my kind of method of thinking about it. I did it, of course, deliberately. I wanted to present, the extreme type of atheistic
Mhm.
belief that we can, we can obfuscate that type of way of thinking and that concept, and refute it with simple, um, we call it um, we call it logic, but of course there are rhetorics. So by the use of simple rhetorics, simple reasoning, and means of deduction, we can, come to the conclusion. It's like you can see it. It's like a mathematical equation. You can see how we go down and all the proofs along the way until we get the final equation and the final, final
Mhm.
question that is unrefutable, unquestionable,
Yeah,
uh,
I just if in my own yeah, in my own
affable.
experience, what I've found, because I think of myself as a very logical person, but what I've found in my experience is logic has to do with data. So what your inputs are, and then you create your equation, and then you get an answer. But that answer may be wrong based on your inputs. It's kind of like in computers, in programming, and so on.
Hmm.
Garbage in, garbage out type of a thing. So, like, if we get the
Yeah.
wrong information into our equation, then we may come to the wrong conclusion from that sense. But
Mm.
what I wanted to kind of also like my secondary question was what I have more interest in related to that sin. So like when Adam and Eve were cast out of the garden and they were not allowed in, like at that time there seemed to be a break in the a break in the in life itself, in the sense of the integrate or the completeness of life. Like there was a break between the spiritual and the physical. So now it's like these two separate things potentially versus them being one and the same before. Like because before Adam talked to
Mm.
God and so on, and then there was the serpent, the like a spiritual being kind of intermixed in there, and then afterwards now it's like only physical, and they only talk to God in a certain way. It's not the same as it was before. And I've
Mhm.
heard
Yeah, yeah.
of people. Somebody mentioned. I don't know if you know Chuck Missler. He has passed away already. He's anyway. So he has multiple books and things that he published. But one thing he mentioned that I believe it came from Israel. The thought that the reality that we live in right now is split into like 10 dimensions, and they're saying that like four
Hmm.
of them are
Yeah.
knowable or measurable, and six are they use terms like curled where you can't measure it.
That
But
that's Kabbalah. That's Kabbalah. That's the esoteric, mystical side of
mhm.
Judaism. There's the exoteric, there's math. Uh, um, there's math, and there's textbooks and literature, and there's movies and music and stuff like that. Everything has, an implicit side, an exoteric, surface level type of veneer, outside veneer, and there's an inner explicit, sorry, opposite explicit, and there's an implicit esoteric side of of things. That's just the belief. It starts from the belief of the duality of nature. You know, there's the earth and the sky. Okay, there's light and dark. There's, there's good and bad. There's compassion and there's cruelness. There are so many dualistic kind of
Hmm.
concepts. You can see it, we have 2 eyes, 2 ears, we have 2 hands, 2 feet, etc. So the duality of nature starts in man. Okay, man itself and nature itself, the surrounding nature has the dualistic side to it, all of that the time. So in Kabbalah, there are the four earthly kind of stratospheres, and then there are the six kind of atmospherical or celestial type of nodes. The nodes are the different branches in the Kabbalistic tree of life. So the tree of life is represented by 10 different spheres. Each, there are 4 terrestrial spheres that exist in this, earthly universe bound by the logic of
Hmm.
physics, And then there are the 6 higher celestial nodes, spheres, um, that are not necessarily bound by the logic of science and the laws of physics. Um, so yeah, we can start looking. In Judaism, there are 4 levels or grades of interpretation. Each one gradually more intricate, complex, um, you know, implicit, very purposefully convoluted and confusing. Um, so the more you delve deep into the rabbit's hole, the more you have the chance to lose. Well, that's a warning. That's a warning that Kabbalah gives to anyone that tries to, grasp at that knowledge and try to learn deeply. Um, if you want, I can talk about Kabbalah, or we can talk about anything else you
Yeah, I
want
mean, if
from
yeah,
this point
if
on.
you want to bring that together, so my understanding of the 4 and 6 split was like 4 dimensions are knowable, meaning like we have length, width, height, and then we have time. So those are like
Yeah.
the knowable, measurable.
Four,
And then the
yeah,
six, yeah, the other 6 are
exactly.
more like on the spiritual level kind
We
of thing.
have, yeah, we have time, space, of course, and time,
Well,
space,
the space
and
is made of 3 dimensions.
uh, no, no, yeah, the space are made. Uh, time, just a second. I'm losing my mind here. There's time and space, the physical space, and there's a third dimension. What is the
But
third
I
dimension?
was thinking
I
that the
forgot.
dimensions would be like if you have a flat plane, you have, left and right, you go to infinity, then you go up and down perpendicular. So now you have two dimensions, and the third going up. So the spatial dimensions, there's three of them in that thing, and then
Mhm,
time is the fourth one added onto
mhm.
it. So three spatial dimensions in
Yeah,
one, and the fourth one being time.
something along those lines. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, the fourth dimension, of course, is time.
Yeah.
The time passing. Um,
But yeah,
so
sorry. So
those,
you were mentioning Kabbalah, that there's a teaching there about these 10 areas or dimensions or spheres you mentioned. So what is that like
yeah,
compared to the physical and the spiritual?
the physical and the spiritual. They differ in that. Okay, starting from the beginning. Okay, when you start talking about Kabbalah, it's not that simple. You talk about terms of space and material and time. Um, okay, each different sphere or node or branch in the in the um, in the tree of life is divided. The divide the tree of life the tree. Okay, firstly, the tree of life divides into two separate parts. There is the feminine part of the tree, and there's the masculine part of the tree. And each branch, uh, divides further, you know, to different aspects. There are some Kabbalistic philosophies that attribute each sphere to, the a zodiac sign or a time period in history or different attributes or different different virtues that a person has within himself, and they can be masculine types of traits, and they can be feminine. Now the question is, how deeply do you want to go into this?
I mean,
Because
maybe for this, yeah, maybe
the
for this session, just kind of skim through it. We can have a follow-up podcast where we go into it deeper and kind of learn more there.
yeah, I think it's preferable. It's preferable. And so just let me say this about Kabbalah. Kabbalah originated from the 13th century in medieval Europe, of course, in Spain in the 13th and the early 14th century. Um, there was a book that appeared called the Book of the Zohar. And the Zohar means the glistening, shimmering light. Um, the light, of course, refers to the light of God. Kabbalah postulates that there are several different, narratives when it comes to the genesis of the world within Kabbalah. But there are two main sort of beliefs or uh, methods, to how or creation stories in Kabbalah. there's the book of the Zohar, and another book that is fairly early. Nobody knows exactly when it was written. Perhaps it was written in Hellenistic times, uh, at least in the Middle East. Uh, they don't know. They don't know if it was in Israel or it was, in Egypt or another part of Europe, Italy, perhaps. It's called the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of Yetzirah. Yetzirah literally means creation in Hebrew. So the book of creation and the book of the shimmering, glistening light, the Zohar and Yetzirah. Yetzirah talks about how the world, or how God created the world through math. So God is a sort of kind of a geometric engineer that is able to fashion different objects and material by the usage of numbers, which is very fascinating in itself. And the Zohar takes a different approach, or, the creation myth or the Genesis story is very different. In the book of the Zohar talks about gorgeous, monumental light, similar to a kind of meteor, that passes through the
Hmm.
atmosphere, and that kind of heavenly light penetrated, a darkness, a lot of pagan and pantheistic or polytheistic belief systems and creation myths talk about, the the binding, or um, the heaven and the earth, fusing into one to create the terrestrial plane. So, of course, there's the story of Uranus and Gaia in the theogony. Theogony is the collection of creation myths that was written in 800 BC by what's his name? Hesiod. Sorry. He written the Theogony, of course, a collection of creation myths detailing the creation of the world, by Uranus and Gaia, you know, um, they're kind of their spouses, that inherit the earth. It is very similar to the creation myth of Genesis, where the sons of the heavens would co-mingle and breed with the daughters of the earth. It's very similar to that. Of course, there's the Egyptian creation myth, where Nut is the mother of the sky, uh, and the father, the father sky, and the mother earth would, you know, breed together to create humans and the world. So it's very weird, but the Zohar talks about uh, brilliant heavenly light that emanates from the Godhead itself. I'm not talking about the physical, of course, head of God, but the Godhead, the creative, imaginative fashioning of the constitution, the constitutions that make up matter itself to actually create the earth and everything that surrounds it, and of course humans. So those are the two creation myths and the two um, uh, core canon texts of
Mhm.
Kabbalah.
Yeah, so we can talk about that maybe in a different podcast, like get into more details of it. Since we spent a little bit of time
Yeah,
already
of
here.
course.
Um, are you still good on time? I just have maybe one more question or two questions. Okay.
I'm fine. Yeah. Whatever question might have, I vacated my schedule completely.
Yeah,
So,
thank you. Um, so kind of going into modern times like today we have conflicts all over the world, but especially in Israel with Hamas and others. And then we have the
mhm,
conflict in Ukraine and Russia, between Russia and Ukraine, in Ukraine. What do you think,
mhm,
like, on from a humanistic perspective, we know, okay, well, Russia wants to invade, they're kind of more imperialistic or whatever. However, like we can attribute motive on a natural level. But
mhm,
so Russia Ukraine conflict, that could be explained more naturalistically. But when it comes to um, the conflict in Israel throughout history, it seemed like like other nations had something out for them. You mentioned going back to Napoleon and get in the ghettos, and then there was the Holocaust and so on. So like it almost seems like there's something more on the spiritual side where some entity really wants to destroy Israel, not just on the physical side. Like what's your view
mhm.
on that and on kind of world conflict in general?
Well, as I've mentioned, great questions. Not yielding. Um, Conflict arises from conflict of interest. um, there are opposing viewpoints. Um, you know, Theology, ideology, culture, sociology, um, language, um, different, um, you know, economies, territorial disputes, um, even linguistic disputes can be found between, you know, different tribes in the same sovereign state. Um, for example, Korea and North Korea, to take one example, there are linguistic feuds. If you hear someone speaking, you know, Russian, and you say, "Wow, your Ukrainian is quite good," you are liable to, um, you make your own fate, by that point. So those types of territorial disputes, even disputes about food. There are different. cultures and societies that dispute, whose food is better, who are the best, the most athletic kind of a nation, who is the richest, who has the most resources. Um, all of that factors in, to the reason why there are conflicts still raging on in this modern, pseudo enlightened post modern post uh, monarchism, post religion, post morality, I would say. The kind of rigid, old school, stoic, learned, intellectual kind of morality. Yeah, I would say the world has passed it, by a mile, And so, getting back to the conflict between Israel and Palestine. Now you can tackle that problem from different angles. And it depends on what angle you would like to emphasize over the other. I would like to emphasize the kind of social, contemporary situation, because we need, to dedicate an entirely different, um, conversation and episode for that. Um, it's not that
Right.
simple. Even though it seems like it's very simple, a dispute over territory, no, not even close. Um, Currently, we see a lot of operations, the IDF is performing. They want to go into Rafah, one of the biggest Palestinian cities, has close to 1 million people living within its walls. If there were an an operation, military operative, active military operation in the boundaries of Rafah, it will be a big problem, because you're talking about, you know, combating in an urban setting, and any, you know, any step you take is a precarious one, and could be your last, because you don't know where the potential threat will come from, which direction, who and why and how. It's unpredictable. Um, I don't know. This will spiral out of control if Israel will go and conquer the Palestinian territory. Um, this could either be the best thing that happened to Israel or the worst thing. The worst case scenario is we manage to conquer, the Palestinian territories, to banish the entire population, or to subjugate them under foreign rule, which is not plausible in my opinion. You have to have some proxy kind of pseudo temporary government supervising, making sure that the people have proper food, water, and they have proper resources like electricity and running water and sewage system, and they have some type of um, education system, um, some type of recreational activities, to be had. Uh, if so, um, it's very complex. It's very sad to see that a lot of Palestinian children are sort of collateral of this conflict between adults, um, you
Do you think
know,
there's a spiritual component behind
Israeli
this,
soldiers.
like a spiritual entity or something like that?
Uh, I think you don't mean spiritual. I think you mean
Well,
religious.
I guess we'll have to define what those terms mean. I mean, let's put it
Yeah, I
this way.
would.
Like, is there a spiritual entity or well, is there an entity outside of human and like not a is there a non-human motive behind there?
Oh well, we're back to the purpose of humanity again. Um, if there is some supreme deity that governs, and dictates which countries at which time will be in conflict with each other and over what cause or purpose the conflict will involve or be about. That will be the greatest discovery in human history, to have a definitive proof. Christianity purports to talk about, the resurrection of Christ on the third day. Um, so firstly, Christ was a Jew. He was not a Christian because the Christian faith was not established until St. Paul actually converted into Christianity on his way to Damascus. And after he managed to convince the 7 Asiatic churches to convert into Christianity and spread Christianity throughout the entire Roman uh, Empire. Up until then, nobody nobody knew who Jesus was, but they knew about Christians. So that's a different matter. It's not to the point. So the point we are trying to make is, if Jesus truly was nailed to the cross, underwent, the Via Dolorosa, the ways of suffering, he, if he was tortured, if he was pierced by the spear of destiny, um, if he was crucified, and they say he died, he was crucified in midday, 12 on a Good Friday, and he died at 3 o'clock. And, his spirit went, well, that's the theologians, interpretation, the Christian theologians. His spirit went into the underworld to battle Satan for the soul of humanity. And on the third day, he came back, he was vindicated, he ascended. There is a great word for it. It's called apotheosis, from Greek to ascend higher, you know. Apotheosis. Apo means outside, and theosis is divination, vindication. So he was divinized, he was given the status of a god on the third day with his resurrection. And there are arguments whether it was a reincarnation, whether he was reincarnated by body and spirit, or was he just, ascended directly to heaven. Um, if that if that event occurred, human history will be altered, for the rest of time. Everybody will be Christian. Everybody will perform the rites of the Eucharist, um, eat of the flesh of the living Christ and drink of his blood. Everybody will go to Sunday Mass, Nobody will skip a beat. On the other hand, um, atheists say that Christianity and Judaism, they are not unique with their beliefs. A lot of religions believe in some sort of a messiah and kind of figure that will vindicate and absolve humanity of all their sins. Now, of course, there are different ways to end up in the same place. So, of course, religions have many varying types of beliefs, and of course, a lot of prerequisites before salvation can actually occur. So personally, finally, what you wanted to hear. Personally, I believe in some type of higher power. I think my belief is Jewish deistic, Jewish deistic. It's not particularly Jehovah's type of belief system, but I believe in some type of governing providence, um, some type of unmoved mover that created the world. It doesn't mean that it's either a feminine type of figure or a masculine one. I think those kinds of questions are childish and arbitrary. But there's definitely something. There's definitely something that is looming over humanity, not in a kind of patronizing, parental way, but in a more, elusive, implicit, un unknown. They talk about the vanishing hand of God or the mysterious ways of God's works. Um, I semi believe in those types of concepts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the reason why I'm asking that particular question is like I'm wondering, like I was trying to tie the whole Genesis to this here. Like according to the biblical account, Israel was set apart from the world, like to be. I don't know if they were to be an
Mm,
example or to, but basically,
Yeah, they were favored. Yeah, they were favored
Right. So
among
I'm
the
wondering,
nations.
because they were favored, is there an entity, an opposite of God, that wants to do destructive things, where God does things that are
Mm,
constructive, then the other entity does more like of a destructive things.
yeah, there are. There is the example from the Old Testament, the book of Job, where we are first introduced to the character of the devil. So the devil is called Satan. And this Satan is a direct, alliteration, you know, uh,
Hmm.
transcribed from Hebrew, transliterated from Hebrew to English. So in Hebrew, we say Satan. In English, they say Satan. It's almost the same thing. And it means the
Hmm.
opposer. Satan, Satan means the opposer, the contradictor. Um, if you ever heard about Job and the story of the book of Job, uh, I'm going to introduce another literary term called theodicy. And theodicy is the reasoning of why they're trying to reason uh, why there is
Hmm.
bad in the world, why there's evil in the world. So there are a lot of literary works and oeuvre that talk about why there's evil in the world, like like Dante's divine divine comedy, about that, Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. Um, that's one example, the most famous one. But another example is the book of Job. Once upon a time, God consulted with with the angels, the upper, the divine beings, uh, you know, that fly in the sky, and among them came the devil, Satan. And Satan challenged God to find him, said to challenge God to find him the one to challenge his most favorite, loyal worshiper and believer, Job, that was, impeccable, infallible in his moral character and aptitude. And Satan says, well, give me give me like a KGB, give me 2 minutes with him, you'll have your confession. So so Satan challenges God, and God says, okay, I'm giving you free reign, REIN, reign, to do as you please with my loyal servant Job. So Satan goes to work. Firstly, he kills off all of Job's, cattle. Secondly, he kills all his sons and daughters. Then he takes away his wife. Then he plagues Job with an awful kind of a skin disease, and nobody knows exactly what that is. A lot of people um, uh, call it. maybe it's equivalent to smallpox, but it's not exactly that. So a theodicy like that, there's a character. Yeah, there's one example of that character appearing. Um, but in Kabbalah or in Jewish mysticism, not just in Kabbalah, and in Judaism in general, there's another figure that is more prominent in the Jewish literature. That's called the angel Samael. And Samael, it is not permitted to pronounce his name in Hebrew. So only abbreviations are allowed, but not that pronunciation that I uttered. So Samael is more equivalent to the angel of death. But he is, he is the spirit of chaos. He rains down chaos on humans wherever they are. He executes, mayhem and bedlam wherever he goes, and he tries to hurt God's creation, his children. So that's an opposing figure in Judaism. Samael, purportedly, according to the folklore or the legends, Lilith was Samael's consort. And according to Kabbalah, Lilith was Adam's first wife. And she tried to tempt him first. Tempt him how? Well, by laying down with her, breeding, and their offspring will come to, rule the earth as a sort of antichrist, a monstrous, type of being. And so Kabbalah is very weird, and just talking, this is just surface level, in Kabbalah. It's you might be amazed, but this is just the surface level for Kabbalah. So yeah, those are the kind of opposing figures to the divinity and authority and rule of the Almighty God.
Yeah, definitely it's some interesting topics that some things I'm definitely not aware of. So cool to kind of learn and get intro into different information there. I have one last question for you. So, what do you think the world needs more of today?
In general,
However you want to answer it.
it's an open-ended question. Well, I don't want to be very peace and kumbaya because, and I don't want to sit here and sound like some elitist creep. But I think we need we need more elitist kind of creeps. So the story of the Tower of Babel is a very fascinating one. If you think about the world, even in natural history, astronomers and geophysicists and geologists they talk about, the unified continent of Pangea. And Pangea is what the Earth used to look like, millions of years ago. It was one huge continent called the Pangea. Um, and the Tower of Babel is equivalent to that notion, to that naturalistic fact history of the Pangea. The Tower of Babel uh, was the megalopolis, the metropolis of humanity, the bastion, the kind of utopian, Arcadian ideal of humanity. All of the humans worked, together to build that tower. They fashioned a unified culture, a unified history, myths, society, and most importantly, they fashioned a unified religion. So now you understand why I warned you that I'm going to talk like an elitist kind of creep, um, because that's a technocratic, elitist of the upper echelons talking about, a unified civilization, but without the plebs or the proletariats contaminating that kind of pure utopia that will, come in the future. But I believe uh, that humanity needs to fashion some type of similar model. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean that we all have to live in one big biosphere or kind of aquarium where we have to see each other, 24 hours a day, and everyone, every nation, race, gender, nationality, culture, religion lives in a kind of in complete and utter harmony with each other, where the golden rule is enforced all of the time. Um, you know, don't do to your neighbor what you do not want to be done unto you. But I believe we need to strive for some type of unified vision that will encompass all of the nations. There's needs to be a paradigm shift. There needs to be an introduction of some type of alternative um, theory, some alternative motive that will be presented to the public, some kind of unified, banner, some kind of unified message, codified, even perhaps a codified, unified constitution that takes into account um, all the different cultures and societies and languages. Um, that will take a lot of time. The amount of people. This needs to be, a true global conspiracy in order to happen. Um, the UN seems to be, a kind of a model, for something like that. One world government in the best of senses, not, in any sinister or nefarious, like the Georgia Guidestones, if you heard
Mhm.
about them. Yeah, those kinds of prophecies. No, I don't believe in that type of world government. I believe in it truly, because the United Nations does not have, all of the nations as its members inside the institution. And the United Nations is massively, you know, faulty. You know, it's it. We have a saying in Hebrew. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, and vice versa. Um, so it's very convoluted, very confusing. They are agenda driven, which is very much progressive and unintellectual, uninformed. Um, you know, the kind of radical extremist ideas that come from pseudo pseudo Marxist, pseudo anarchist that they don't know the difference from a Luddite and a communist. They're just following the mantra that they are being indoctrinated into in those colleges and schools that their parents are wasting hundreds and thousands of dollars on. For example, at the University of Columbia, the insurrection of pro-Palestinian students, that took over, almost conquered the campus
Mhm.
itself, is very scary. Um, and we have precedents in history. There was the student revolt in the 60s in Paris and other European countries where, students that were opposed to the Vietnam War, they wreaked havoc and mayhem and destruction on the campus grounds in some major European cities. Um, so yeah, we need to find our bearing. We need to find our secular and religious, ideological messiah. Uh, it, in my opinion, it can't be, AI, and it can't be virtual reality, because virtual AI and virtual reality will take us to two completely different routes. Okay, virtual reality. Virtual real. Can
Yeah,
you
yeah.
see
Just
me?
adjusting here. Yes.
Good. Yeah. Okay. Virtual reality will take us to the Matrix
Mhm.
route. You know, everyone will be plugged into that machine 24 hours, you know, all of the time, and they will feed the machine
Well,
their into.
thank you for joining me here for today, and maybe in the future we can
Yeah,
come up with more specific kind of topics and kind of delve into them.
yeah,
Yeah.
of course, whatever you like.
All right, Guy. Yeah.
I'm
Again,
an open book.
thank you so much, and looking forward to staying in touch with you and having another podcast later on someday.
Yeah, awesome, of course.